Let's face it, starting an agile transformation is hard, but achieving a tipping point in your organization is even harder. Well, stick around, because in this video, I'm going to talk about exactly how to do that. Welcome back, folks. I'm Karim.harbott, and as ever, I am talking all things business agility and innovation. So before we get going, if you like these videos, please give it a like, a thumbs up, and feel free to subscribe to never miss out. Also, I love to hear what you have to say, so please let me know your thoughts in the comments. So the question on everyone's lips is, how exactly do we achieve a tipping point in our transformation? Well, before we talk about how to do that, I'd like to take you all the way back to 1962 and a concept introduced by a gentleman called Everett Rogers. Now, he introduced something known as the diffusion of innovation curve, which showed how new innovations, particularly technology innovations, spread throughout a population. You probably heard a lot of the terminology from that. We'll cover that in a minute. 30 years later, 29 years in fact, that was updated by Geoffrey Moore in his landmark book, Crossing the Chasm. And he said, this also applies to new ideas in any population, including an organization. So the key thing here for us is how we spread ideas through our organization in the same way we would want to do in an agile transformation. So let's take a look at the diffusion of innovation curve. So what Everett Rogers has identified here is that there are different types of people who are more or less likely to want to take up a new innovation. Some people want to be the first, some people may be fast followers, some people want to take forever, and they're not going to do it until they absolutely have to. And so what percentages do we have, and how do we need to be different and deliberate in our communications in order to achieve that particular group of the population? So let's start with the innovators, 2.5% of the population. These are the people with the great ideas. These are the people who want to change things, want to do new things. These are risk takers. These are entrepreneurs, and they don't mind about usability, even if it's tricky to use. They'll find the right cables. They'll find the right piece of software. They'll do all the workarounds because they want to be first, and they want to have all of these great ideas. They want to be at the forefront of new technology and ideas. You probably know those people, always trying out new stuff, always got different phones, always got different technologies going on, different hi-fi systems in their house. And it's the same with the early adopters, the next 13.5%. They're not necessarily coming up with the ideas, but they are the first people to jump on them. They're probably trading in cryptocurrency and have been for many years. They were probably early users of MP3s way before the iPod came out and made it easy to do. All of these things, they're not necessarily the idea generators, but they are jumping on these ideas as soon as they come out. So the innovators and the early adopters forms about 16% of the population. They are normally quite easy to get. They're the early market and they love new things. Then we have the early majority. That's 34% of our population, so a big chunk. So you can see how important this group is, and many people really target this group. We'll talk about maybe why you don't want to target this group up front in a minute or two. But these are people who are a bit more cautious. Maybe they are going to need some case studies, and they're going to need some people to have done it before. They don't want to be the first because they are inherently risk averse. So they want it to be packaged nicely, easy to use. So these are the people who started using MP3s when the iPod came out, and when iTunes came out and you could buy music easily and legally to put on your iPod, and it was just, the usability was wonderful compared to what existed, and the people who'd used it and they're like, now we feel safe to do this. They're your early majority. Then another 34% is your late majority. And these people really, they're not going to do it until not just some people have done it, but until the majority of people who've done it. So they'll be after the innovators, the early adopters, and the early majority, and they'll begrudgingly come along because, well, that cautious group that is the early majority have done it, so now we're going to do it. And that leaves you with 16% at the end. These are the laggards. Not the nicest term, but these are the laggards. So these are the people, like my parents, buying an iPhone because they had to, because they couldn't use their bank without the app, and it didn't work on the old Nokia brick that they used to have. Sorry, mum and dad. And so they're the people who only change when they absolutely have to. These are the people probably until recently were still playing records, certainly weren't going to move to CDs, and never mind MP3s or even Spotify. The laggards, and they change only when they have to. So what does this have to do with our agile transformation? Well, as you can see, the first group is the early market. The second group is the mass market, right? From early majority onwards. That's the mass market, and they need a different message to the early market. So here's what's interesting. Geoffrey Moore talked about crossing the chasm. That's the gap between the early adopters and the early majority. Well, to succeed, you have to cross that chasm. Most technologies and most new startups fall into that chasm. You get the easy wins with the early majority and the innovators, but you never cross into the mass market. It takes something very different, like the iPhone and the iPod, to cross into the mass market. It needs to be much more usable, it needs to be packaged better. And so that's the chasm Geoffrey Moore talks about in his book, a 1991 book, Crossing the Chasm. So for an agile transformation, how do you cross the chasm? How do you reach that tipping point? Well, the answer is not by targeting the early majority. Which sounds counterintuitive because the early majority are what you need. And I'm saying, ignore them at the start. Because you will never get those people until you've got the innovators and the early adopters. So initially, you have to start small, and you have to target the people who you will get to come along without the case studies, without the reviews, when it's a bit rough around the edges, and without all of the packaging that makes it easy to use, and all of the documentation. And so you invite these people, and you say, who wants to do this? Let's do an agile transformation. Who's on board? This is the problem we're trying to solve. This is why it's going to help our organization. This is the outcomes that we seek. And those people will volunteer. And you take one product line, 3, 4, 5 teams delivering one product, one value stream, one service, and you invite the innovators and the early adopters. And you iterate and you get it to work, and you get success studies, case studies, success stories. And you say, look, it's working really well here. Come and have a look, come and check it out. These are the outcomes we've achieved. Only when you've achieved success with the innovators and the early adopters, and you've documented it and you've got case studies, will you have a hope in hell of getting the early majority on board. At that point, you switch your marketing message and you say, look, how well it worked over here, and we've documented it, and we've solved a lot of the problems, and it's a bit more of a polished product. Now, early majority, we're coming for you, and this is the problem we're solving for you, and this is why it makes your life better, and we can prove that it works in our organization. Then you have a chance of getting them. And once they start doing it, and once they start seeing results, then the late majority is going to come on board, because now you've got the vast majority of the company working in that way. They're more comfortable. And the laggards, well, the laggards will come along when they absolutely have to, when it's no longer tenable for them to work in the old way, because you've changed governance, and you've changed HR, and you've changed leadership styles, and you've changed organizational structure, and they just can't work in that way anymore. And if they do, it won't progress their career. So they'll come on board, but they're only the last 16% anyway. So how do you achieve a tipping point? How do you get that early majority? Start by ignoring them. Well, maybe not ignoring them, but don't make them your focus. Invite the early adopters and the innovators, make a success of it on a small scale, and then scale it out. You'll learn the lessons in a far cheaper way, and then you'll have a far easier time convincing the mass market, the early and late majority. And once you have them, you are off to the races. Okay, I've made it sound way easier than it is, of course. You need to find the right product, the right value stream, and the right set of teams to deliver value against it. You need to be up against a whole host of other things in your organization. But if you can make it work on a small scale, you have a much greater chance of making it on a big scale. If you try and boil the ocean at the start, I can all but guarantee that's not going to work. I know because I've tried many, many times and they've all failed. The only times I've seen success is when you start small. So bear that in mind when you are trying to start your transformation, and that's who you need to target. So I hope that was of use to you. I hope that's given you some food for thought on how you start your transformation and how you can use the diffusion of innovation curve from 1962 and the concept of crossing the chasm from 1991 on your agile transformation in the 2020 decade. So best of luck with that. I wish you all the best. Again, please feel free to like this and to subscribe, and I would love to hear what you think about this theory of agile transformation and tipping points. Stick around because there's always another video coming, and I'll try to get another one out in the next week or two. Until then, have a wonderful time and stay curious, folks.